Okay, you beautiful New Zealanders, this is the series, The Treaty for Newbies, for people who don't know much about the treaty but want to know about the treaty, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible. We're talking about Article 2, Video 4. Of course, this is about Article 2, Sentence 1, the very first sentence of Article 1 of the treaty, and here it is again. The Queen of England confirms and guarantees to the chiefs and the tribes and to all the people of New Zealand the possession of their lands, dwellings and all their property. We have discovered so far in our series, this is the 4th video, in 1840 the British considered that New Zealand was a sovereign Maori nation. This is why they came to ask Maori to cede sovereignty. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? Why would you want the Maori to cede sovereignty if they didn't have sovereignty? Come on. The people of New Zealand, quote, in Article 2, Sentence 1, this is a reference to Maori. Each chief had their land surveyed and titles were issued. In the previous video, we talked about their surveyed land being their 1 centimetre squares. Remember that? If you missed that, then go back and watch the last video. The British promised to protect Maori in the ownership of their land, dwellings and property. The foreshore, seabed and beaches belonged to all the citizens of the country. This was because, according to British law, the law of public commons it's called, quote, the air, running water, the sea, and with it the shores of the sea, unquote, belonged to all the citizens of the country. And since Maori had become British citizens, and this was British law, and British law was imported into New Zealand, it applied to Maori as well. So there you go. The word possession in this article meant simply that, possession. You could use the word ownership, and that's an accurate alternative. Sometimes makes it easier to read. Alright, it's worth noting at this point that by signing the treaty, the Declaration of Independence 1835 was superseded. Watch this. All those who signed this declaration were sought out by the British, and they all signed the treaty in 1840. In effect, this meant the treaty cancelled out the 1835 declaration. Who says this? Historian Dr. Matthew Wright says, quote, the declaration was accepted by the Colonial Office to the extent that its signatories were sought and collected for the Treaty of Waitangi, which superseded it. There you go. Doesn't get any clearer than that, and there's the reference. Okay, back to Article 2, Sentence 1, and there it is. There was another word of great interest here, and it's the word property. Missionary Henry Williams in 1840 translated this word as taonga in Maori. Historian Bruce Moon says the word taonga has an interesting history. In 1820, while assisting Kendlin Lee of Cambridge in compiling the first Maori dictionary, Hongi Hika had defined it as property procured by the spear. That's what that word taonga means in 1840. In an appeal for protection by 13 Ngāpuhi chiefs to King William in 1831, they said, quote, this is the 13 Maori chiefs, we are a people without possessions. We have nothing but timber, flax, pork and potatoes. And their word for possessions was taonga. So there it is. It's pretty clear, isn't it? In other words, it just means chattels. Things like walkers, implements, weapons, pots, pans, and so on. That's what it means. Bruce Moon, doesn't he done a great job for New Zealand? What a great, great man this guy is with all the history that he's put together for us. Fantastic. Well done, Bruce. We could say at this point that the meaning of Article 2, Sentence 1 is very, very clear from what we know. You could say the Queen guarantees to protect Maori with respect to the possession of their land, houses, and dwellings and content. That is just so simple, isn't it? So clear, in fact, that activists detested that clarity. They set out to change the meaning. Enter Hugh Carferu in 1989. There he is. He said the word possession, in Maori that word is tino rangatiratanga, did not mean possession or ownership, like the British said it meant. He said it meant unqualified exercise of chieftainship. Well, watch what happened. What does this mean? Carferu said the treaty guaranteed Maori the right to be chiefs over all of New Zealand forever. Ridiculous, isn't it? But this is what he said. How can Maori today be chiefs over all New Zealand when those chiefs sold 92% of their land? One can't be a chief over land one has sold. Give that to Bart Simpson. Do. I have never heard such a stupid idea, but activists wallow in these ideas. He also said the word property meant treasures. This was a big, huge change as well. He said taonga refers to all dimensions of a tribal group's estate, material and non-material, heirlooms and wahi tapu, sacred places, ancestral law and whakapapa. In other words, the treaty, he said, guaranteed to protect and promote anything that Maori in 2024 treasure. When this happened, treaty fraud just exploded. Carferu's interpretations of these key words gave Maori activists the idea that dual sovereignty was in the treaty, Maori doing their thing, that's being chiefs over all New Zealand and operating according to tribal rule, and the rest of us doing our thing, running a democracy. This too is an impossible and stupid concept. Two governments can't run a country. Go Bart. You know what? When these two changes came in, when Kāwhuru changed possession to mean unqualified exercise of chieftainship, and he changed property to mean treasures, then a whole galaxy of new ideas was spawned. It was like kicking a dandelion. A whole galaxy of new words were spawned and bandied around by activists. Self-determination, sovereignty, autonomy, self-government, domination, rule, control, power, highest chieftainship. See what happened? They all started to think like this, the activists, that they were going to have self-government and autonomy and self-determination, and on it went. Maori started to say things like Maoris are in charge of their land and resources and aspirations. Well, hang on, they've never not been in charge. Each person in New Zealand is in charge of their own land and resources and aspirations. Nothing new about that. They started to say Maori are going to start acting with authority and independence over their own affairs. Well, again, that's what everybody else in New Zealand's been doing for nearly 200 years. Come on. Tino Rangatiratanga is a practice, they say. Maori living according to tikanga law, tribal Maori beliefs, superstitions and customs. So they want a two-tier society. They want Maori and the rest, and they're gunning for that. They have started to say things like Maori did not cede sovereignty after all, even though Kāwhuru said they did. You see, they pick and choose what they want to believe now, and that the treaty is a business partnership between Maori and the Crown. This is what they're saying. So what we have here is confusion and contradictions now reign. Partnership is another ridiculous idea, that the treaty is a partnership. Why? Sovereignty and partnership are mutually exclusive concepts. You can't have a four-sided triangle. That is to say, if Britain entered into a partnership with the Maori chiefs, then Britain was not sovereign. Watch this. Here's an activist actually spouting all this out.
Still there.
Okay, let's talk about some of them. ACT wants to rewrite the treaty principles.
Yeah, absolute nonsense.
The principles is established by judges, politicians, lawyers, etc. are basically partnership, participation and protection. Now, David Seymour, the ACT leader, says he wants to give the public a say. What is wrong with that in your view?
Yeah, well, he can look. The document is about a partnership. The treaty is about partnerships, right? Māori and the Crown. Simple as that. You can't give the same rights to an immigrant to this country that has been long entrenched, not only in law but in our history since 1840. So while Seymour tries to...
Let's unpack that for a second. Sorry, because you drifted off, but what I heard was you can't give the same rights to an immigrant to New Zealand as opposed to someone who's indigenous to New Zealand. Is that what you're saying?
No, because what Seymour was saying is that actually every other New Zealander has the same rights as Māori.
Yes,
that's a nonsense.
There you go, right out of the horse's mouth. Exactly what they think, and that's how they're thinking. They believe in apartheid, separatism, racism, a two-tier society. Really, really bad. Anything activists treasured could be demanded from the government because, quote, it was in the treaty, say the activists. When one merges history-ignorant, low-IQ politicians with very slippery, corrupt, seasoned activists, disaster results, and this is what we're seeing today. You know what? We have a whole stable of politicians who are like walking along watching a fly on the end of their nose, and they're headed for the edge of a cliff, and they're taking all of us with them. They're just focused on today's little affairs and not the big picture. It's really dangerous. This is what's happened. Every single one of these ideas coming out of the activist camp are not in the treaty. What we must hang on to is the fact that the British would never have set up an apartheid state in New Zealand, with some citizens having superior rights over others. Not in a million years would they have set that up. But activists say, yep, they did. That's what they were doing. It's fanciful, isn't it? But this is what the activists believed happened. By changing the original meaning of this word property, changing it to treasures, Maori started to claim things that were not in their 1 centimetre square in 1840. An example would be the awarding of the 5G cell phone network in New Zealand to Maori because the treaty promised this, so they say. There you go. Maori set to receive a quarter of the key 5G network band and $57 million under the Crown deal. Come on. You know what? What is that? Another example would be the claim by Maori that the treaty promised to protect and promote the Maori language. I can't now think of one government department which does not require their institutions to give effect to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and its principles, unquote, supposedly, quote, promised in the treaty. Well, you know what? How should we view these awards, these settlements, these treaty claims, these promises, or these treasures? In a word, they're outright fraud. There is absolutely nothing in the treaty about the British guaranteeing these things to Maori? Absolutely nothing. Remember what I said in the last video about the British surveying the land that each chief owned? I asked you to imagine a map of New Zealand, and in the middle of the North Island I drew a red square 1 centimetre by 1 centimetre. Remember I said this square represented the land owned by a particular tribe as at the 6th of February 1840, after the land was surveyed? Just keep this in mind with what I'm about to say. Regifting the 5G network, it's impossible to procure a 5G network with spear. For a start, the 5G network did not exist in 1840, so it was not inside a tribe's 1 centimetre square. But the 5G network, according to the activists, is a treasure. See the fraud? Regarding the seabed and foreshore and the water, we've talked about this, and the law of public commons, which stated, quote, the air, the running water, the sea, and with it the shores of all the sea, unquote, belong to all the citizens of a country. This was British law. Maori say the seabed, foreshore, beaches and water are treasures. So Maori can't make a claim on the seabed and foreshore because when sovereignty was ceded, the seabed and foreshore were given over to Britain to be managed by them on behalf of all New Zealanders. That is a fact. Regarding the treaty promising to protect and promote the Maori language, just read the treaty and see if you can see this promise in there. It's not there. The British understood that the Maori language, culture and customs were to be preserved and promoted by Maori themselves as they went about their lives inside their 1 centimetre square. There is a proviso here. Lord Normanby in his instructions to Hobson said, but the savage practices of human sacrifice and cannibalism must be promptly and decisively interdicted. Stopped, in other words. Such atrocities, under whatever plea of religion they may take place, are not to be tolerated with any part of the dominion of the British Crown. In other words, they said, mate, you Maori, you do your cultural thing, you do your whatever your rituals, your cultural anything. It's all go inside your 1 centimetre square, but the things that you have to stop are human sacrifice and cannibalism, slavery and infanticide, because that's what they were up to. Regarding the treaty promising to protect and promote the Maori language, really it's a ridiculous idea that one culture, the British, would be made responsible via the treaty for preserving and promoting the language, culture and customs of another culture. Do you know what? Maori have said, you know what, their language is a treasure, so they say it's a treasure, therefore it's in the treaty, and therefore the government is responsible for promoting and marketing the Maori language. This is a ridiculous idea. Imagine the Indian community in New Zealand agreeing to fund and promote the Chinese language and culture. I mean, can you think of anything more stupid? Never have I heard such a ridiculous idea, but Maori activists today say this is what the British agreed to in 1840. Come on, Bart. All because they say Maori language and culture is a treasure. With every other cultural group in New Zealand, each cultural group is responsible to preserve and promote their own language, culture and customs. In short, they delight to preserve and promote their culture because it's in them to do so. It's part of their very DNA. It's like a homing pigeon. Inside a homing pigeon there's some sort of mechanism inside those birds that takes them home to their loft. And you know, it's the same with people in their cultures. There's something in them that just wants to promote and nurture their own culture. When Maori put the onus on the government to promote Maori language and culture, things don't add up. Something's wrong here. What is it? Think about it. If Maori language, customs and culture were really valuable to Maori, like they say they are, wouldn't they want to take responsibility to pay for and promote their own culture, customs and language? Come on, think about it. So why have they not done this? In New Zealand today, there are 160 cultures. One of those cultures is Maori culture. Maori are the only one of the 160 who demand that the government be responsible for promoting their language, their culture and their customs. The other 159 want to fund and promote their own culture and language and culture, but Maori want to be paid to do it. Doesn't that seem odd? To me it does. There must be other motivations at play here. It does not require much effort to see what they are. Think about it. Maoris boast that they have a $70 billion Maori economy, so why aren't they using their own money to develop their language and culture? There is no valid reason to use taxpayers' money when they have plenty of their own. So just what is the reason? Well, playing the, quote, you promised to promote Maori language, customs and culture through the treaty card has proved to be a wonderful cash cow. They milk the whole idea of the language being a treasure. It's lucrative. There is a lot of money going to Maori for the development of their language, customs and culture, all under the guise of treaty treasures. There's one, 47.3 million boost in operating funding to increase Maori language. You know what? Over the last few decades, hundreds of millions of dollars have been given to Maori for their culture and their language. Really, it's just fraud. That's what it is, because it's based on treasures, which was a fraudulent manipulation of the treaty in 1989. Well, how should we summarize these 4 videos on Article 2, Sentence 1? 1. The final English draft of the treaty is superbly simple. Even a child could understand it. They said about Article 2, Sentence 1, this is the British said, quote, "We'll protect the ownership of your land, dwellings and property, everything inside your 1 centimetre square, but the beaches belong to everyone." That's it. That is Article 2, Sentence 1, summarised from a British perspective. That was it. So simple. Funnily enough, this is exactly what David Seymour is trying to do with his Treaty Principles Bill. His original 3 principles, not the ones he was forced to amend, were a perfect summary of the original meaning and intent of the treaty. His original 3 principles were that the government has the right to govern all New Zealanders, that the government will honour all New Zealanders in the chieftainship of their land and all their property. Number 3, that all New Zealanders are equal under the law with the same rights and duties. Now, when you write into make a submission on David Seymour's Principles Bill, just make sure you say that we want the original 3 principles reinstated. We reject utterly the rewritten Principle 2 that the government forced on David Seymour. These 3 principles, the original 3 principles, need to become law. We've had enough of the activist treaty manipulations, haven't we? Their distortions have exchanged British clarity and simplicity for tears, corruption, fraud, confusion, racial division, racial disharmony. Seriously, New Zealand's in really big trouble. Enough's enough. Come on, guys, fight, fight, fight. We got to all join together to fight against this crap and bring New Zealand back to an even keel. All right, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.